this is, in a lot of ways, our biggest release to date, and includes a lot of the most requested features that we've heard from our existing customers and prospects over the last 6 to 12 months to add more visibility and more customizability to what you can do with GJ Dossier. So I'm going to dive in and we'll see how we can help you potentially make your job and your team's jobs easier by automating your data management and relativity. So to start, I'm going to log into Relativity just as I would on a typical day. I'm going to demo in a Relativity 1 sandbox today. GJ Dossier is available for both Relativity 1 and Relativity Server. There are a couple server features which are not available, or excuse me, there are a couple features which are not available in the server version, but I'll highlight those quickly when we get to them. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. If I can get it to work, there we go. Password keeper, sorry. So when I first log into Relativity environment, I'm going to see a new GJ Dossier parent tab with a number of child tabs in the admin mode of Relativity 1. And this tab is really my gateway to simplified data management. So if I click first into the configuration tab, let's just look at the layout for starters. And we're waiting for our Relativity 1 sandbox to load. There we go. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we're going to see a breakdown of all of the clients, and if I expand these, the different matters that are present in my environment. So this is kind of how I enable the scope of the application, and then on the right-hand side is where I actually configure the details of how GJ Dossier's automation should behave. GJ Dossier's configuration works very similarly to Relativity's permissions framework, meaning you can configure everything at the global level if you want and just leave it at that. That'll apply to all clients and matters that you have enabled within GJ Dossier for monitoring. Or if you want, you can get more granular with your configuration and drill down and modify configuration settings at the client or even down to the matter level. I'm going to just focus on the default configuration right now. And again, it's really up to how important that level of customization is for you. If you want to use the same blanket settings for your entire environment, you can. You don't have to modify any individual settings at the client and matter level. I'll talk more about these individual settings in a few moments, but for the now, I just want to dig into a couple options that we have on the client and matter side. So for the client and matters, if we expand these again, you'll see for each one, there's a toggle that essentially says whether GJ Dossier should monitor workspaces associated with this matter for its automated workflows. So if any matter that I enable here, meaning the bar is blue, that means Dossier is monitoring workspaces associated with that matter for inactivity. If I turn this off, it's not. I have the option to mass enable monitoring for all matters under a given client if I want to do that. And I also have the additional radio button at the top of each client to say, if I were to create a new matter for this client in the future, should I automatically begin monitoring workspaces in that matter as well? And then further down at the bottom left of the screen, also an option to say, if I create new clients in my environment, should I begin monitoring all of their new matters and workspaces as well there. So you can essentially configure the system if you wish to just always begin monitoring anything new that you create over time if you wish to do that. One other note is GJ Dossier supports client domains in Relativity 1. So client domain admins, if you're a customer who uses client domains for certain clients in your environment, your client domain admins can be granted permission to manage configuration settings for their matters directly if you want to give them the ability to do so. On the right-hand side of the screen then are the settings for how we want GJ Dossier's automation to actually behave. What actions do we want it to perform? So let's dig a little bit deeper into that. The first thing we're going to do across the board is we're going to configure notification recipients. And these are individuals who should receive email notifications when scheduled actions are either upcoming, have completed successfully, or have encountered an error and require some action. Just a reminder, everything on this screen that I'm going to talk through, again, can be figured as a global default or can be customized at the client or matter level. Next, we will dig into a few of the inactivity configurations and exclusions that we can configure. So one of the cool things we can do is exclude specific Relativity users groups, or even entire domains from activity monitoring, meaning actions performed by those users do not actually register as activity in a monitored workspace. By default, we're going to exclude Relativity's baseline service accounts and domains that are present in Relativity. These accounts are ones that Relativity typically uses for their own monitoring purposes and do not represent actual user activity in your system. So we have those accounts from the Relativity side hard-coded to be excluded from the monitoring process. If you also wish to exclude your admin team, for example, you can click on the Users Domains Excluded button here, and the little pop-up window gives you the option to do a few things. You can individually specify user accounts by using their email addresses separated by semicolons. You can also specify entire email domains. So in this case, we're excluding all of the Inserio.com domain, for example. And then finally, I can also select individual groups within Relativity, and it will automatically exclude any users who belong to that group. So for example, what I could do is just search in here for system administrators, check that box, and I hit save. And now everyone on my system administrator team is ignored when it comes to Dossier evaluating whether there's been activity in a given workspace in your environment. This allows system admins effectively to perform activities in a workspace, viewing documents, running searches, just performing whatever checks they need to perform without actually resetting the activity counter for that workspace and disrupting the workflow. So I am not going to save that. I'm going to close out. Oops, sorry. Similarly to excluding specific users, you can also choose what types of actions should be included or excluded in the monitoring process. So by default, we effectively look at any action performed in the workspace will register as activity. But if you wish, for example, maybe you only want to register activity if changes are actually being made to the workspace. You can uncheck, for example, the view and document query options. And then this means anyone jumping in, viewing a document in the viewer, or running a safe search, that doesn't count as activity because we're not making any actual changes to the data. But if they were to perform an edit to a document, add a new document, perform a mass edit or a mass replace, those are actual data changes, and that would reset the inactivity counter. So you can further and customize kind of what the scope of the activity that you wanted to monitor for is from that perspective. Finally, then, really the meat of what GJ Dossier does for you is the 4 distinct actions that can automatically execute once a given workspace reaches a specified period of inactivity. These actions include repository, cold storage, archive, and delete. So repository is a Relativity 1 only feature that installs the repository application in the workspace if it meets the criteria to be a repository workspace. Cold storage is another Relativity 1 only feature. This moves the workspace to cold storage within Relativity, which moves the workspace to a cooler tier of Azure storage and reduces the cost of that workspace billed monthly in Relativity 1, but also renders the workspace inaccessible until you decide to bring it back from cold storage. So we can automatically put things on ice effectively if they've been inactive for a period of time. Archive and delete, the remaining 2 actions, are included in both Relativity 1 and server versions of GJ Dossier. Archive takes an ARM archive using whatever settings you prefer for the ARM and enables you to optionally transfer that file out of Relativity entirely once the archive is completed. And then finally, the delete option allows you to fully delete a workspace from Relativity when it's no longer needed. So GJ Dossier's delete action also works with the recycling bin feature in Relativity 1. So if you do need to bring a workspace back, you have that 7-day grace period where you can restore it from within Relativity 1 before it's like fully deleted forever. Important to note that archive and delete are 2 distinct actions in GJ Dossier. We get this question a lot. Performing an archive will not automatically delete the workspace from Relativity once complete, so you have control over whether that workspace stays around for an extended period of time or whether you ultimately delete it at all. You actually see in our demo environment here, I actually don't have delete enabled because I like to have my demo workspaces on hand for demos, so I don't want to clean them up. If desired, though, if you do want to have it automatically delete after an archive completes, you can do that, but it's not required. I just like to point that out. Other note, the application will only execute the actions that you enable within this configuration, always in sequential order from left to right. And it will never move on to the next action until the previous action has successfully completed. So there's no danger that, for example, your workspace is going to get deleted before the archive is completed been validated, and been transferred out of your environment. For each enabled action, you're going to specify two things. First is the number of days of inactivity that the workspace how long should the workspace be inactive before that action executes? And then how many days in advance of that should users be notified of that upcoming action? So in the case of the repository action here on my screen, I'm going to be sending workspaces to the repository application after 30 days of inactivity. And the users configured at the top are going to be notified about that action 4 days in advance. So on day 26, myself, a couple other people on my team are going to receive an email notification saying, hey, in 4 days, we're going to install the repository application in this workspace. And the same applies to all the various actions left to right. You'll see we have this sequence of chyrons that kind of highlights the overall total life cycle that your workspace is going to take through the GJ monitoring process. So what we currently have configured here right now is after 30 days of inactivity, we're going to install the repository application. After 90 total days or 60 additional days of inactivity, we're then going to move that workspace to cold storage. And then after a total of 210 days of inactivity, we're going to actually archive that workspace. Sorry. Okay. My screen just blacked out for a second there. Can everybody, George, can you still see my screen?
I can.
Okay, good. I'm back. I just wanted to make sure I didn't get disconnected. Okay. Archive action has a few more settings that I want to talk through really quickly. It is a little bit more in depth. So number one, GJ Dossier is always going to initially export your ARM archive to the default ARM location that's configured in your relativity platform, and that's indicated by the drop down here. So this is the same location that you're configuring in the baseline relativity ARM tab. This is your often in relativity 1, this is your staging location, right? On server, this can be whatever repository you point it to. You have the option then, once that archive completes and is initially exported to your staging location, do you want to copy it to external storage? So you can turn this on or off. If you want, you can just leave all your archives in your staging. They stay within your relativity 1 environment, and they're there if you need them. If you enable this, you can specify a connection to an external Azure Blob storage account, and GJ Dossier will automatically transfer the archive to that location, validate that the file was completed successfully, and then again, optionally, if you wish, you can enable or disable this, delete the ARM from your local staging location once the transfer to external storage is completed. So the combination of moving to external storage and then deleting the local ARM after the copy completes is effectively what enables you to get that archive file entirely out of your relativity environment and into your own private Azure storage. But again, those are both entirely optional. You don't have to do that whole process if you want to keep things local in your relativity environment. One other thing I'll point out is I mentioned you can customize the ARM settings. That is done by clicking on this little blue box next to the ARM location. If I click on here, it's going to pop up a window that presents all the same options that are available in Relativity's core archive functionality within ARM. Whatever settings you specify here will be used for all automated ARM actions performed by GJ Dossier. And again, this, like everything else, can be configured down at the client or matter level. If you have different settings you want to use for different groups of workspaces, you can do that. So that's how the automation works. You kind of configure your timeline, you configure which actions you want to execute, and Dossier runs and it monitors your workspaces for inactivity. And when workspaces hit these thresholds, it performs the actions you specify. Now that we've configured how to automate, I also want to take you through actions on demand, which is the third tab across the Dossier tab here. Actions on demand lets you execute all of those same actions on one or more workspaces at a date and time that you specify. So for example, a common workflow that we hear about in Relativity 1 is system administrators wanting to either move a bunch of workspaces to cold storage at the end of the month, or maybe even delete a bunch of workspaces right before the end of the month, just so they don't get billed for that peak monthly usage at the top of the next month when the month rolls over. So rather than waiting for things to be automated, archived automatically on maybe the 3rd of the month, they're going to go ahead and queue up a bunch of cold storage or archive or whatever, specifically on the 31st, so they can account for that in their billing process. So what I can do with Actions on Demand is queue up a new request. And in this case, I'm going to choose cold storage. I'm again going to specify my notification recipients. And here now I can pick any date and time I wish. So it's August 1st now. Like I should have done this yesterday. I missed it in my workflow for the end of the month. But if I want to get ready to clean up for this month, I can come down here and select August 31st and say, okay, at the end of the month at, we'll say 10 p.m. I want to put a bunch of workspaces in cold storage. I now have a workspace list here that I can filter and sort. So I can, maybe I want to do this for all workspaces for a given client. I'll search for my POC client. I can actually mass select all of these, hit save, and this will queue up all of these workspaces to be added to cold storage at the same time at the date and time that I specified. So again, you can do any of the Dossier operations with Actions on Demand. So this effectively also gives you the ability to mass delete workspaces if you wanted to do that. Once I've saved that job, you can see it now appears here at the top of my screen. It shows that it is in a scheduled status. I can click on the workspace count. It'll give me a little pop-up of all the workspaces that I have selected as part of that job. And until that date and time hits, which again, I configured it to be at the end of August at 10 p.m. Central, I can optionally cancel the job entirely, or I can modify it. So I can change the settings. I can change how many workspaces are included. I can change the date and time. I can modify those until that date time hits. So in this case, I'm actually going to cancel this, but I just wanted to show you how that works. So that's Actions on Demand. Very powerful for if you want to do things at specific times of the month rather than simply waiting for the automation if you are trying to account for specifics in your billing process each month. So next, I want to highlight the ARM Restore feature. This enables you to restore an ARM archive directly from your external Azure storage that you've previously copied there. This really just saves you the time of manually copying the archive back to your relativity repository before you have to restore it. So once your external storage is configured, as we have in our system, what I can do is effectively just search. I can browse for specific clients and matters that I have stored in my external Azure storage. So I'm selecting my Charlie Kelly matter. I'm just going to click Get ARMS. It's going to reach out to my Azure storage blob and query for what are all the archives that I have in Azure right now that are tied to this client. So I see I have a couple different archives of the Kitten Mittens workspace. I can choose one of these to restore. And from here, I'm just going through the normal ARM restore workflow just within the GJ Dossier tab. So again, this is really what it's going to do behind the scenes here when you go through and configure everything and kick it off. It's going to automatically transfer this ARM file back to your relativity staging location, unpack it, and then put it through the ARM restore process as if you were doing it manually. Just saves you the trouble of having to go to your Azure Storage Explorer, manually download that ARM, put it back into your relativity environment, and go from there. So just a nice little quality of life time saver if you ever need to bring a workspace back that's previously been archived. Last thing I would like to show all of you now is the GJ Dossier reporting suite. This is a collection of individual dashboards and reports which provide visibility to the data that GJ Dossier is managing for you over time. The default reporting tab is called the dashboard. It displays an overall summary of how much data has been processed through each of the available GJ Dossier actions. Across the top of this dashboard, you'll see a total number of workspaces and overall amount of data that GJ Dossier has put through each action over time. These numbers represent not only the data managed by GJ Dossier, but ultimately highlight how much data your team is no longer needing to spend valuable time managing or thinking about, how much data Dossier is just moving for you. So I'll note, like, the numbers here obviously are very small because this is our sandbox environment. We have customers who have already, in the span of a quarter, have archived and deleted upwards of 5 terabytes of data from their relativity environments, just through the automation and cleaning up inactive workspaces. Next is forecasted actions. The forecasted actions tab is very powerful for a couple of reasons. Number one, it shows you what's going to happen in the future based on your current configuration settings, and it accounts for both the automated monitoring piece as well as any actions on demand jobs that you have scheduled. Every forecast of every action that's upcoming for any workspace that's being monitored by Dossier. based on its current period of inactivity. So, for example, if I'm looking at the bird law workspace, the first row here, I can see the bird law workspace currently has only been inactive for 2 days. And currently the next action that I have scheduled for it is that it's going to put it into the repository workspace. This is coming from our monitoring, aka the automation, and that's going to happen on August the 29th at 2 a.m. If I were to go into BirdLaw today and perform an edit, perform some activity in the workspace, this would reset to 0 and this forecast would be regenerated with a new date. You can see if I look just for BirdLaw in the workspace list here, it's actually forecasting all of the upcoming actions that are scheduled to be performed. So I'm going to move this workspace into a repository state as of 8/29. And then if the workspace remains inactive about a year from now on June 25th, 2025, I'm actually going to delete this workspace from the environment. So this goes as far forward into the future as your configuration allows and lets you get a really easy picture of, number one, how long have all the workspaces in your environment been inactive, so you can even sort by inactivity days and see, my oldest workspace right now is Fight Milk. Nobody's touched it for 82 days. But also get an idea of everything that's going to be upcoming so you know what to expect. And this is where, if you see, for example, oh, this is going to get deleted on the 12th, I'd really love to do that right before the beginning of the month. You can do an action on demand, and the system will account for that if you want to get a jump on the billing savings for that workspace, for example. Cool new feature we just added in 1.11 on this tab is also the ability to instantly reset the inactivity status for any workspace. So again, say it's coming to be time for this workspace to be archived. Fight Milk is going to be archived in December. Obviously that's not close, but let's pretend it was going to happen, tomorrow. And I've heard from the team working on this workspace that we're going to be picking up activity again, and we don't want it to be archived anymore. Historically, what I would have had to have done was actually jump into this workspace, perform some action, but you don't really want to just perform unnecessary actions in a client's workspace. So instead, now on the dashboard here, you can go to any line, any upcoming action that's been forecasted, and just click this little refresh icon, and this will give you the option to reset the inactivity days for that workspace. So if I were to hit yes here, if I were to confirm, it would change that 82 back to a 0 and generate a new forecast for that workspace. Meaning now it's, again, we've effectively spoofed the system into thinking that this workspace was active today as opposed to have not been active for 82 days. So probably not a very commonly used thing, but something that we think you'll be very glad to have when the situation does arise where you need to delay a scheduled action without having to completely dismantle your configuration. Next then is the historical actions, which, well, forecast looks forward to what's coming in the future. Historical actions reports on what has happened historically within the GJ Dossier application. So full audit history of all actions that Dossier has completed over time, again, including both automated monitoring and actions on demand, as well as ARM restore. So I can filter by the source here if I want to view individual sources. I can also filter for individual actions. So maybe I just want to see my archive history over time, just filter from my archive workspaces. So you can view the type of action performed, the date time that it occurred. The action date is when this action took place. The notification date being when was the team notified that that action was going to take place, and so on and so forth. So just a really good viewpoint into what the system has done for you. I should also note, like the forecasted actions report, I skipped it, I apologize. You can export these reports to CSV using the export button on the lower left. This is something else new that we just added in 1.11. And this export button does respect any sorting and filtering that you apply to the view. So when you click export, you can get this out. So another good way, if you, again, want to just get a better understanding of how much inactive data is even in your system right now, just jump to your forecasted actions, export the whole thing, and you can carve that up in Excel however you want and understand how many inactive workspaces you might want to start cleaning up in your environment. Finally, then we have the processes running tab, which this is going to show any processes that are currently in flight for GJ Dossier. And we see this is, I forgot to clean this up. This is a result of some testing that I was doing the other day. These repeated ARM restore failures. So this kind of thing normally wouldn't be here, but you would see here anything that's actively running real time. So this will display jobs for any of the actions that GJ Dossier supports. Although typically the only things you're ever going to actually see on the screen are archive and armor store options, just because, you know, repository, cold storage, and delete basically happen instantaneously. So they typically won't be running for long enough to appear on the list. But you can get an idea here of where things stand. And specifically when you're running archives, it'll give you visibility into at what stage through the archive process is a job. So is it currently taking the archive out of relativity? Is it currently transferring the archive to your Azure blob? Or is it currently cleaning up your relativity staging location after that transfer has been completed? So you know exactly where the process is. And I think that's everything that I have to show you today. Thank you very much, and I will turn things back over to, I think, George, if you had anything else you wanted to cover. Otherwise, I think we can start into Q&A.
Yeah, we can go right into to Q&A. I think one thing that's important to note here, Relativity Fest is September 25th through the 27th. We've also allowed for the GJ Dossier early adopter pricing to continue through Relativity Fest this year. So if there's interest there in learning a little bit more about how we charge for the software, either on a with storage or more for the data management option where the value truly is, please feel free to reach out and we can share some of those pricing details. Very predictable pricing and very much in line with different models that you're probably familiar with today. So we've got a couple of minutes. Just want to make sure that we leave the opportunity open for questions. Okay, so I'll take the opportunity to close this out then. Doesn't look like we have any questions for this particular demo. We will be sharing this online, so if you know somebody that might be interested in viewing the demo, please feel free to share with them. We'll also be sharing online and LinkedIn and various sources of social media. Again, if you would like to see this live or talk a little bit more about some of the specific feature set, please feel free to reach out. And if you're interested in meeting with us at Relativity Fest, you can send an email to info@georgejohn.com. And if you like what you see, please vote for us. So we've got a little bit of transition of slides here. I think I went backwards on my talk track, but looking forward to connecting with everybody in person at Relativity Fest as well. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day and hopefully an early start to some of your weekends.
Thanks, everyone.